Welcome to another body language video. Today we're going to be focusing on eye movements and pacifiers or self-soothing gestures. And the person we're going to be looking at is Christine Lagarde, the Managing Director of the IMF. It's not about targeting a person. We're not looking at a person's faults. We're not trying to detect lies. We are looking at an individual and looking at what patterns emerge in their non-verbal communication. So the video I've chosen, Christine Lagarde is talking about women in the corporate world, but more important in this video is her non-verbal behaviour. So let's have a look at the whole video in its entirety.
In the early 70s, late 70s, there were not many very active women in the legal profession. And I wanted to be a lawyer by that time. So I interviewed with many firms, and many firms said, yes, why don't you come in? And the only firm that I interviewed with that had a woman in the partnership was Baker McKenzie.
Okay. But that was important to you, to be in an environment in which, to be in a firm in which you could see that there was already a woman in a position
sure,
of
but
power.
there were plenty of firms in Paris at the time who would say, you're fine, you have the perfect background, but don't ever expect to make partnership.
Right.
You'd say, why? And they'd say, because you're a woman. Those were the days. I had a role model. It was a female partner who hired me, together with the eldest son of the founding father of the firm. When you've been brought up by excellent role models, and my mother was one, and Monique, who is the partner I was telling you about, was one as well, you just want to reciprocate.
I've talked to a couple of people at Baker just about your time there. One anecdote that I sort of jumped out to me that I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on is that we were talking at the beginning about you sort of being the first woman in the chair position, and I understand that there were some people that defaulted to calling you chairwoman, and that you officially were never called that. You were always called the chairman. And is that something, can you sort of talk a little bit about why that was important to you?
It probably comes from the French.
Right, because I know at the ministry you did something very similar,
yeah,
right? That
Madame le Ministre, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
That comes from my mother. My mother was a professor specializing in Latin, Ancient Greek, and French grammar.
Okay.
So when I was appointed chairman, president, whatever you want,
right,
and later on minister, I checked with her. I said, "Well, what do you think? Do you think I should turn the name into, or turn the title into the feminine version of it?" And she said, absolutely not. This has nothing to do with the gender. It's a name. Grammar has to be respected. The rules are the rules. So therefore, don't change the name. Change the way in which management is conducted. That's fine for you, my girl. But
right.
Don't try to change names. That's just icing on the cake. The cake is more important.
What would you say to people who would see that as wanting to sort of go out of your way not to draw attention to your gender? Do you think that
well, they should pay attention to the real thing, which is what people actually do at the end of the day, not how they portray themselves.
Nice, I like that.
And there are those who are, I think, looking for a change of direction from the IMF, who are critical of your appointment. And I'm sort of wondering if you have an answer to that in terms of your ability to take the IMF in this direction and make it more global.
No, the pudding will be in the eating, as I said during the press conference.
Okay.
I don't think you can prejudge somebody's ability to do something until that ability has been tested.
Okay.
The rest is conjoncture, as I would say in French. I'm a free market,
right,
at the end of the day. But there are areas where you need to have regulation, where you need to have supervisors, because otherwise it leads you to excesses and abuses.
What are the concerns that need to be sort of addressed among, the sort of prominent Western countries that control the IMF about this process?
Well, number one, that the world has changed, and number two, that to be legitimate and to be effective, the institution has to represent properly the world as it has changed, and that as a result they will not suffer from that restructuring and from that reform. Quite to the contrary.
Let's talk then just about bringing women up, their sort of position in the fund.
Well, women that surprised me. When I was interviewed, for instance, by the board, it was a board of 24 men.
Right.
That is a message about diversity, and it has nothing to do with the fund itself. It has to do with the people that are sent by their constituencies. And That I'm sure will change over over time. The only female member of the board is Meg Lutzanger. But it's, as is often the case.
It's like you said in law.
The higher you go in the hierarchy, the less, the fewer women there are.
And then are there things that you plan to do, to sort of actively? Is that something that you would like to actively?
I think we need to, and that's very often related to number one, maternity leave, ability for people to come back to work afterwards, ability to work from their maternity leave and be in touch with the organisation and stay in touch with the organisation. But I'm not going to change, U.S. society in and of itself, because very often when you ask female employees who manage to work their way up, they often had the support of a husband, or the support of their parents, particularly their mother, or their mother-in-law, or they live in countries where the domestic support is relatively easy and cheap.
Are there certain characteristics that powerful women share with one another that make them sort of distinctive from men at the same level?
We can laugh at ourselves. It's complicated actually, because I'm sure that men amongst themselves do the same thing, but we tend to not overdo it in many ways. And there is an element of solidarity which is caused by the fact that we are a minority. I'll give you an example. This morning, for instance, the only female director in the room. It was a board meeting, and she called me chairman. She said, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
And then she laughed, and I laughed, and I said, only you could have said that.
Could have said that.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's, the sense of
well, here director is a neutral noun, right? So you don't have the same.
Yeah, but when the managing director presides the board,
or the board, you are the chair of the board,
Madam
right.
Chairman. That's how they call me, and she called me Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
And only she could do that.
And
we just burst into laughter, both of us.
Right. No, that's a good thing. But you are keeping Madam Chairman here.
We don't take ourselves as seriously. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I would hope so.
You would hope so. Can you think of a time in your life when you have felt most powerful?
When I gave birth.
How do you deal with the pressure at the level at which you work and the high stakes that you're dealing with?
I breathe, holding my tummy, and you breathe with the top of your lungs.
Does that come from your time as an athlete, or
a little bit, yeah, and yoga practice as well.
Yeah. Do you feel that there is some connection between being sort of interdisciplinary and being influential?
Yeah. Well, I think of somebody like Bono, for instance, who's a good friend.
Right.
Bono is using his fame and his talent and his incredible singing skills to actually promote some extremely generous causes. I have a lot of admiration, a lot of time for somebody like him.
What use, if any, do you make of social media to connect with people, or what role do you think it has in terms of leveraging influence?
Propagating the truth.
Okay. And are you active on any of these platforms, or what's your...
What do you call the social media?
Facebook, Twitter, all these kinds of things, yeah,
absolutely. I was extremely...
I see you're here with, I think this is an iPhone, right?
Yeah. I use iPhone, iPads, and all sorts of things, but I've used Facebook and Twitter, particularly during the campaign, and as a good way to connect with my kids.
Okay, interesting. So you're friends with your kids?
Yes. I suspect them of not putting everything though on Facebook, so
because they know that you are. Because they know that you are watching. Yes, that's that whole game.
Wonderful. So, first of all, I must say, I do not own this video. This video about Lagarde is done by Forbes. So the first thing we said we'd look at was eye movement, and there is a theory. It's only a theory. Well, perhaps to people it's more than a theory, but there is a theory that your eyes move in certain directions, and that gives an indication of which part of the brain you're trying to access. And this diagram, with this dashing young man, is a simplification of that. So this theory would say if you're looking from your perspective, watching this video, top right, you're visually recalling something. For example, you're remembering what your brother looked like the first time you saw him after work, or auditory recall. This way, the theory would say you're recalling the sound of your car this morning or the sound of the birds this morning. But this direction, the theory is it's in order to construct. So if somebody's saying, could you imagine the sound of my happy daughter laughing? Or, I mean, it kind of goes into lie detection as well, where somebody will say, well, if you're looking this way, it's a visual construct. So you're imagining that you're visually constructing you were somewhere else, but in reality you were at the crime scene or whatever. I mean, I don't know how they use this, but I haven't seen any convincing real-life examples of this being used, and I think that's why it's still a theory. But it does raise some interesting questions. Do our eyes move in directions which indicate which areas of the brain we're trying to access? And I'm sure there is a little bit of something to it. I mean, eyes give us so much information about a human being. I mean, you've got the dilations of the pupils, you've got the muscles around the eyes, what are they doing? You have got the direction of the eyes, the blink rate, you also got what kind of angle the eye is, and the eyelid, and the intensity of the eyelid, and things like that. And then there's the eye itself, and there's something intangible which I certainly can't describe, where when you look into the eyes of a person, you feel like you're seeing a piece of their essence, or what you could label their personality. There is something very intangible and extraordinary about human eyes, especially, and I think that's probably why this theory is so interesting. I don't know if this theory is true, but regarding this video of Lagarde that we just watched, I found a pattern where she looks in certain directions based on certain themes. And if I give you a free shot of her face, I've kind of found in this video that she tends to look from your perspective down and to the right, this direction, when she's talking about anything feminine or female or anything to do with the feminine identity. And she has a tendency to look this way, so from your perspective down and to the left, when she's talking about men in the corporate world or her experiences, two experiences she's had relating to men in the corporate world. And this is just a theory, and you're going to have to bear with me while I explain this ludicrous theory, because I found it fascinating when I first saw it. So let's look at this side first, femininity and female. I have one example at 050. Let's open you up. 050. Here you go. Just have a watch.
Excellent role models, and my mother was one. And Monique, who is the partner I was telling you about, was...
Did you see she was looking down and right when she's talking about female role models?
Excellent role models, and my mother was one. And Monique, who is the partner I was telling you about, was one.
And then you've also got 134, where she talks about... Well, I'll let Lagarde speak for herself.
Very similar,
yeah,
right? That
Madame
you
absolutely.
Yeah, right.
That comes from my mother. My mother was a professor specializing in Latin.
Again, she's talking about her mother and looking down and right again.
Ancient Greek and French grammar.
Okay.
So when I was appointed...
and then she moves on to a different subject, or she's trying to find the right word here, and her eyes move again. We've got 147 as well. Actually, we can continue from this place. Watch how her eyes wander around, and then when she speaks very quickly about her mother again, her eyes go to the same area.
Chairman, president, whatever you want.
Right.
And later on minister. I checked with her. I said, well, what do you think? Do you think I should turn the name into...
So again, it's going in that same direction. And then 615.
You're keeping Madam Chairman here.
We don't take ourselves as seriously. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I would hope so.
You would hope so. Can you think of a time in your life when you have felt most powerful?
When I gave birth.
See, that second take on her physical body is great, the second take, because you can see quite distinctly she's looking in down into the right again, if you have a look. And this is talking about giving birth, which is part of the feminine identity.
When I gave birth.
How do you do?
So there are a couple of instances there where she's talking about females, being a woman, femininity, giving birth, where she looks down and to the right. And now secondly, there are two instances where she looks down and to the left when she's talking about men in the corporate world. So if we have a look, 028.
See that there was already a woman in a
Oh,
position
sure,
of
but there were
power.
plenty of firms in Paris at the time who would say, you know, you're fine, you have the perfect background, but don't ever expect to make partnership.
Right.
You'd say, why? And they'd say, because you're a woman.
Did you see it? She looked very briefly down and to the left when she was referring to the men in the boardroom. She said something like, when they said, and boom, her eyes went to the left. If you have a look again, have a look for when she says they said.
To be an affirming, which you could see that there was already a woman in a
Oh,
position
sure,
of
but there were
power.
plenty of firms in Paris at the time who would say, you know, you're fine, you have the perfect background, but don't ever expect to make partnership.
Right.
You'd
Coming.
say, why? And they'd say, because you're a woman.
Okay. Second time, 340.
About bringing women up their sort of position in the fund. And
Well,
when women
that
have seen...
surprised me. You know,
Okay.
when I was interviewed, for instance, by the board, it was a board of 24 men.
24 men, and her eyes started to wander down and left again. Have a look again.
Let's talk then just about bringing women up their sort of position in the fund. And
Well,
when women
that
have seen...
surprised me. You know,
Okay.
when I was interviewed, for instance, by the board, it was a board of 24 men.
See, this is fascinating because she's speaking and her eyes are wandering, and then for feminine stuff it wanders and then goes down and right, and then for men in the corporate world it wanders and then goes down to the left. And I find that interesting. Second, we said we'd talk about pacifiers, and this is a subject which some people, I mean, I've read books which have talked about this as people reassuring themselves, people who are sometimes nervous, unsure. It doesn't have to be a negative emotion. Sometimes it can just be, you know, just thinking about something in your mind. And these can be, sometimes they're called self-touching. So when a woman touches her neck, or it could be a woman or a man, touches their neck, or preens their hair sometimes a little bit too much, or touches a part of their face, rubs their hand up and down their thighs, maybe to take sweat off their hands, or I mean, it's quite soothing if you rub your hands up and down your thighs, or touching the top of their arms, or even touching their wrists, which is a very sensitive part of the body, near the wrist. I've actually seen, I mean, neck-wise, that's also a very sensitive part, and people do touch there when they're feeling perhaps vulnerable, or sometimes a bit apprehensive about something. I've actually seen a woman, I have an example, I spoke to a woman who was, women sometimes they don't touch their necks so blatantly, they'll play with a necklace. So they'll play with a necklace, but their fingers and their hands are brushing against their neck, and that soothes them. That's enough to be an act of pacifying. And I spoke to a woman who was, she was saying, oh yeah, she was talking about her son going to Ghana by himself and saying, oh yeah, you know, I'm fine with him going to Ghana and he's going to be fine and he's going to keep in contact with us and I'm not afraid at all and I'm really happy for him. And the entire time she was playing with her necklace and touching her neck. I don't know. And so now we're going to look at pacifiers in this instance. So the first pacifier we have of self-touch, I don't know whether you noticed, but for me, this isn't the best interviewer I've seen. I mean, there's not a lot of give and take. She is asking the questions, but there's a lot of yeah, and that's really it. And there is an instance where the interviewer doesn't really seem to understand what Lagarde is saying. A couple, but there is one serious blunder where she doesn't seem to understand. And Lagarde explains again And that's what we're going to look at, because at that point, Lagarde changes a bit. 5:56. And we haven't seen this behaviour before in this interview. So far she's been quite confident, quite glowing, quite smiley. And now have a look. She's explaining now, again, to the interviewer.
The same.
Yeah, but when the managing director presides the board...
Or the board, you are the chair of the board.
Madam
right.
Chairman. That's how they call me. And she called me Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Look what she does
and
with
only
her
she
hands.
could do that. And we just burst into laughter, both of us.
Right,
Now.
right. No, that's a good thing. But you are keeping Madam
We don't
Chairman
take
here.
ourselves as seriously. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I would hope so.
You would hope so. Okay.
To me, she's moving it around her watch a little bit too much for that to be adjusting just the watch. It would have been suffice to just move it up and down perhaps once. To me, that seems a bit of a pacifier. I mean, that is a very awkward moment, and she handled it very gracefully, and I admire her for that. But I think, I mean, if you watch it again, let's have a look from here. I don't know if that's too far ahead. Let's go here.
So you are keeping
We
Madam
don't
Chairman
take
here.
ourselves as seriously. Let's put it that way.
And, you know, it's
Okay.
not.
I would hope so.
It's not just the watch being adjusted.
Can you think of a time?
There is a time after that as well, just after the awkwardness. Where is it? It's actually just straight after that. And we can have a look. 6:17.
Time in your life when you have felt most powerful.
If you look at her facial expression there, she's looking quite apprehensive, just a bit not as glowy and smiley and confident as she was before. She's also touching her chin. The way she's touching it, she's rubbing it. Very kind. It might be self-soothing. It might be that she has an itch. There is always hundreds of possibilities as to what the human mind is doing. So you don't know really. But I'd say just from the fiddling of the watch and then going straight to this facial expression and to rubbing her chin in that way, just the way she does it, it seems like an example of a pacifier. Now, this is an individual who does use pacifiers. We all do, but there's a wonderful example from a different interview. Once again, I do not own this video. This was published by Woman in the World. In this interview, the man is asking Lagarde about her advice for women who are upcoming in the corporate world, what advice she would give to them. And more important than her answer, which is obviously, her answer is great, look at her body language and look at the way she carries herself on this chair that she's sitting on. And compare it to the confident Lagarde we saw only moments ago.
Describe the experience, and what advice would you give for woman economic minister number 2? The one to follow you, for how to be...
Her shoulders are slouched, she's hugging her own body, and now look at the facial expression that goes with it.
Impactful in that context.
Never imitate the boys.
I mean, it's exaggerated, but there's uncertainty, clearly. I think that goes with her body language. Now, there is always the objection that, yes, she might be cold. Yes, I understand that. But then explain this. Look at where her hands go when the camera zooms out.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I said, don't...
Now, she's not wearing a skirt, so she doesn't have to smooth down her skirt, but her hands went down and up and down and up her thigh. More specifically, her left thigh. There was a bit on the right thigh as well. To me, that's also a pacifier, especially after the succession of the body language, the way she was sitting, the facial expression. Maybe she was unsure she was supposed to say that or something. And then you have the pacifier of rubbing the hand on the thigh. You can look at the whole thing again.
Never imitate the boys.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I said, don't assume that you're going to...
So interesting. If you think I've missed something, or if you think I'm wrong, good. Let me know. Thanks.